I should have known something was wrong the moment we arrived at the Harrington estate. The house was a sprawling colonial-style mansion perched on the misty outskirts of the city. 30 floors of glass and polished stone replaced by ancient timber and cold, gray ivy. It loomed against the dark evening sky like a relic from a movie, its windows glowing with a pale, sickly light. A gravel driveway stretched toward the entrance where Daniel's sleek black car came to a stop. Everything about the place whispered the same message. This is where ancient secrets gather. I sat quietly in the passenger seat for a moment longer than necessary, staring at the front door. Daniel had already stepped out. He was smoothing the sleeves of his navy suit, looking sharp and flawless, just as he did at the Harrington Global Company events. When he noticed I hadn't moved, he leaned down toward the open car door. "Emily," he said impatiently. "Come on. We're going to be late." I nodded quickly and stepped out. Cold evening air brushed against my arms, a sharp contrast to the suffocating warmth I knew awaited me inside. I smoothed down my dress instinctively. It was a simple dark blue, knee-length piece, the kind I wore when I wanted to feel invisible. Daniel started walking toward the entrance without waiting for me, and I hurried to catch up. Inside the lobby, the extravagance was muted by a heavy, airless silence. The marble floors gleamed like glass under a massive chandelier that cast long, distorted shadows across the room. But the focal point wasn't the decor. It was the woman waiting at the foot of the grand staircase. Mrs. Harrington. Daniel's mother was 70 years old, yet she stood with a rigidity that defied her age. She was dressed in a high-collared silk tunic, her face a map of deep, ancient wrinkles that seemed to shift and deepen as she watched us approach. She was a woman of few words, her presence carrying the quiet authority of someone used to being the most important person in the house. Daniel smiled in that polished, professional way he had perfected. "Mother, we're home." She gave a slight robotic nod, her eyes moving quickly to me. "Calculating. Measuring." "Welcome," she said politely, though her voice was as cold as the marble beneath our feet. Daniel had told me the arrangement was perfect. Moving into the family estate would allow him to focus on his climb at Harrington Global, while I continued my work as a freelance programmer. But there was a condition, one that had made my stomach tighten from the very beginning. Mrs. Harrington lived in the attic suite, a space that occupied the highest level of the mansion. As we walked through the house, I noticed a second name tag of sorts on the heavy wooden door leading to the upper stairs. It wasn't a badge of honor, it was a warning. The door to the attic was reinforced with a massive iron bolt, sharp and black against the dark wood. "Emily," Daniel said quietly, placing a hand on my shoulder as we stood in the hallway. Something about his tone made my heart skip. "Just stay away from the attic, okay?" I blinked, staring at the iron bolt. "Stay away." Yeah, he kept his voice low. "Mother is particular about her privacy. It's her networking space, her sanctuary. I don't want things to get awkward." Awkward. The word hung in the air between us. I felt a small chill run through my chest. Daniel cleared his throat, his confident expression cracking for a brief moment. "I just don't want you to feel out of place here, Emily. People talk, and my mother's habits are different." The word stung more than I expected. I realized then that I wasn't just a wife in this house. I was a guest. No title. No authority. Just a temporary inhabitant in a world Daniel was desperate to belong to. That first night, the silence of the mansion was broken. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds from the floorboards above my head. Thud-drag. Thud-drag. It was the rhythmic sound of something heavy, unexpectedly heavy, being moved across the attic floor. It didn't sound like furniture. It sounded like the version of Daniel's mother I saw in the light, slow and frail, was a lie. I smoothed the sheets, trying to ignore the tight feeling in my chest. Daniel breathed evenly beside me, completely comfortable in this world. He was already part of the Harrington legacy, while I was only 20 feet away from a secret I wasn't allowed to see. As the jazz-like rhythm of the floorboards continued, I realized something that made my chest feel heavy. Daniel wasn't just asking me to respect his mother's privacy. He was hiding me from whatever was happening behind that iron bolt. And for a brief moment, the version of my husband I saw under the chandeliers of the Halbrook Grand Hotel seemed like a stranger. Confident. Sharp. focused. But now, in the shadows of his own home, he seemed like an accomplice to a silence that was slowly swallowing me whole. I closed my eyes, but the image of Mrs. Harrington's wrinkled face lingered in my mind. She was the woman people were supposed to see next to Daniel. But she wasn't just a mother-in-law. She was a guardian of a room that reeked of something I couldn't yet name. And suddenly, I understood something that hurt more than Daniel's dismissive words. Tonight wasn't just about settling into a new home. It was about image. And the Harrington legacy, the one Daniel was so eager to protect, was a version of his life that didn't truly include me. I was just a guest in a house of locked doors, waiting for the bar of the iron bolt to slide back and reveal the truth. A month into our life at the Harrington estate, the polished veneer of our marriage began to show fine, jagged cracks. While Daniel spent his days climbing the corporate ladder at the high-rise offices of Harrington Global, I was left to navigate the airless silence of the mansion. I stayed where Daniel told me to stay, mostly in our suite or the small home office I had carved out for my freelance programming. It wasn't hard to blend into the background in a house this large. People quickly stopped noticing anyone who wasn't part of the direct legacy. But as the weeks passed, I realized that the version of my life Daniel was presenting to the world, and to his mother, was a version that didn't truly include me. I was a decorative piece of furniture, a guest in my own home, meant to remain invisible so things wouldn't get awkward. I should have known something was wrong from the way the atmosphere shifted whenever Daniel left for his frequent business trips. With him gone, the house felt less like a home and more like a stage where a different, darker performance was beginning. The bartender-like politeness of the staff vanished, replaced by a cold, watchful efficiency. The most unsettling change, however, was Mrs. Harrington. From where I sat at my desk late into the night, I could hear the rhythmic thud-drag from the attic suite above me. But it was no longer just the sounds that troubled me. I began to notice a pattern. Every midnight, precisely when the city lights in the distance traced thin lines through the darkness, the heavy iron bolt on the attic door would slide back with a sharp, metallic ring. I stood quietly in the shadows of the hallway one night, watching from the passenger seat safety of my doorway. Mrs. Harrington emerged from the attic. She was smoothing the front of her dark silk tunic, her movements sharp and focused, a stark contrast to the frail, wrinkled woman who gripped the banister during dinner. She was carrying heavy, dripping black trash bags. The fabric of the bags looked strained, the contents navy dark and shapeless. As she passed the registration table-like console in the hallway, a drop of dark, viscous fluid fell onto the marble floor. It didn't look like water. It looked like something that would smell of copper and rot. I smoothed down my dress instinctively, my breath catching as I watched her descend the grand staircase. She moved toward the back of the house, slipping through the heavy oak doors and disappearing into the dense, ivy-choked woods behind the garden. I sat quietly in my office for hours, staring at my computer screen, but seeing only the way her deep wrinkles had looked under the hall light. They seemed shallower, somehow. When she returned hours later, her hands were stained dark, and her gray hair was streaked with a new lustrous black that hadn't been there at dinner. She moved with a grace that no 70-year-old should possess, her posture straight and her chin slightly raised. The version of her I saw now was confident, sharp and focused, the exact expression Daniel wore at company events. The next morning, Daniel called from his hotel. "How is everything at the house, Emily?" he asked, his voice navy smooth and professional. I hesitated. I wanted to tell him about the bags, about the woods, about the way his mother seemed to be de-aging in the dark. But I heard the warning in his tone, the same tone he used when he clipped my name tag and told me to stay near the bar. "It's fine," I said slowly. "Good," he replied impatiently. "Mother is an important connection, Emily. Her image is the Harrington image. I just don't want you to feel out of place or start asking questions that make things awkward." The word hung in the air between us like the massive chandelier in the lobby. I read the message clearly. Don't disturb the secret. But the silence was becoming heavy, a weight in my chest that sparkling water couldn't wash away. Every night, the ritual continued. The iron bolt, the heavy bags, the midnight walks into the dark trees. And every night, Mrs. Harrington looked less like a map of ancient wrinkles, and more like the woman people were supposed to see. I began to feel strangely invisible in the house, a piece of the background Daniel had discarded while he climbed toward his navy suit dreams. I realized then that my husband wasn't just asking me to stay near the bar. He was hiding me from a truth that was dripping onto his family's marble floors. Feeling the need for air, I walked toward the balcony doors of our suite one evening. The city lights far below looked like glowing constellations, but my eyes were fixed on the garden. I saw a red gown shimmering softly under the streetlights. Not Vanessa Cole, but Mrs. Harrington, standing near the edge of the woods. She wasn't looking at the sky. She was looking back at the house, her eyes moving quickly from window to window, networking, calculating, measuring. When her gaze landed on my window, her expression changed instantly. It wasn't anger or embarrassment. It was a quiet warning. She gave the smallest shake of her head, almost invisible, but clear enough. Not now. She turned and vanished into the darkness of the trees, leaving me alone with a chill that ran through my chest. I smoothed my dress, feeling the small silver bracelet on my wrist. A reminder of a world that was simple and flawless. The version of the Harrington family I was living with was a lie. Tonight wasn't about networking, it was about survival. And as the thud-drag resumed above me, I understood that the version of Daniel standing under the crystal chandeliers of the city was a version that didn't include the reality of the woman in the attic. I sat back down at my desk, my heart skipping a beat as I realized I was searching for a way out of a room where the doors were already starting to close. I should have known something was wrong the moment the opportunity presented itself. The Harrington estate was normally a fortress of glass and polished stone, glowing with an artificial warmth that never reached my room. But on a Tuesday afternoon, while the city sky was a dull, dark gray, the impossible happened. Mrs. Harrington left the house. Usually, the 70-year-old matriarch was a fixture of the mansion, as immovable as the grand staircase. She was a woman of few words, her face a map of deep, ancient wrinkles that seemed to record the history of Harrington Global itself. But today, she had smoothing the sleeves of her silk tunic and stepped out into a sleek black car. She was going to the local market, the one errand she performed personally each month. Daniel was away on another networking trip, smoothing his navy suit and discussing strategy with senior executives. He had left me with the same low voice and quiet warning he always gave. Just stay near your office, Emily. Don't make things awkward. But as the passenger seat of her car vanished down the gravel driveway, a cocktail of fear and curiosity began to bubble in my chest. For weeks, I had listened to the thud-drag of something heavy being moved above my head. I had seen the dripping black bags and the dark, viscous fluid on the marble floors. I was tired of being a guest, in a world that treated me like invisible furniture. I smoothed down my simple dress and reached into my silver bracelet, the one my sister had given me, where I had hidden the spare key. I had surreptitiously made it by pressing the attic key into a block of wax when Mrs. Harrington was distracted at dinner. My heart hammered against my ribs, loud and sharp, as I climbed the grand staircase. The air in the upper hallway felt colder than usual. I reached the heavy wooden door of the attic suite. The iron bolt, sharp and flawless under the dim hallway light, looked like a silent guardian. With trembling hands, I slid the bolt back. The metallic ring echoed through the empty lobby-like hall, sounding more like a movie sound effect than a real noise. I inserted the key, turned it, and the door opened. I swallowed hard, expecting a bedroom or a networking lounge. Instead, the air that brushed against my arms was ice-cold and reeked of formaldehyde mixed with an expensive, shimmering perfume. I stepped inside, and for a moment, my eyes couldn't process what they were seeing. This wasn't a suite. It was a gruesome workshop, a place where calculating and measuring took on a horrific new meaning. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like glowing constellations, but their light was focused on round tables covered in white linen that were stained with the same dark fluid I had seen in the woods. In the corners stood mannequins, but they weren't made of plastic or stone. They were skeletal frames draped with pieces of translucent, preserved human skin, pinned together with sharp silver needles. I felt a small chill run through my chest, one that turned into a wave of nausea. Mrs. Harrington's wrinkles weren't just signs of age, they were seams. I moved toward a vanity mirror near the center of the room. It was surrounded by jars of tonics and shimmering fluids that caught the golden light. Resting on the marble counter was a ledger, its navy fabric looking expensive and sharp. I opened it quietly. Inside were name tags of a different sort. There were name cards for women who had vanished over the last decade. Names I recognized from the news, from company events, from charity galas. Beside each photo was a swatch. A small piece of skin with a unique tattoo, a mole, or a distinctive birthmark. My pulse began to quicken as I flipped the pages. I saw the marketing director, Vanessa Cole, on one page. Her shimmering gown and elegant posture captured in a candid shot from an annual investor gala. Underneath her photo, Mrs. Harrington had measured her neck and collarbone with professional precision. Then I reached the latest page. I stood quietly, staring at the paper for a moment longer than necessary. It was a photo of me, taken from the balcony just yesterday while I was staring at the city skyline. I looked out of place, simple and unaware. Underneath my picture, in elegant calligraphy that was perfectly polished and sharp, Mrs. Harrington had written, "The final piece. Porcelain texture. Perfect for the neck and collarbone. Ready for the next investor gala." I smoothed my wrist, the silver bracelet feeling like a cold shackle. Everything Daniel had said, the warnings to stay near the bar, the need to avoid awkwardness, the claim that his wife couldn't make it. It all took on a different, measuring focus. He wasn't hiding me to protect his image. He was hiding me until the networking in this room was complete. The thud-drag I had heard every night wasn't furniture. It was Mrs. Harrington, moving the skeletal frames, calculating the next addition to her patchwork image. I turned slowly to the door, desperate to leave the ballroom-like attic and escape the Harrington Global legacy. But as I stepped back toward the red-carpeted hallway, I realized I had made a measurement error of my own. A floorboard creaked behind me. I shouldn't have moved. I should have stayed near the bar. I spun around, and my chest tightened so much I could barely breathe. Standing in the doorway, blocking my exit, was Mrs. Harrington. She hadn't gone to the market. She had been waiting for the guest to arrive. She stood straight and focused, her posture carrying a confidence that Daniel had likely learned from her. In the dim light, I saw that her deep crevices were gone on one side of her face, replaced by a smooth, youthful cheek that looked familiar. She held a long, curved surgical needle threaded with fine silk, sharp and flawless. "Emily," she said, her voice a youthful, chilling melody that was perfectly professional. "Daniel told you to stay near the bar. I just didn't want things to get awkward." She gave a small, almost invisible shake of her head. "But since you're here, we can begin the fitting. You belong in this room more than you know." As she took a step forward, her fingers sliding along the needle, I realized the Harrington legacy was a version of life that truly didn't include me. At least, not while I was still breathing. I stood frozen in the center of the attic workshop, the ice-cold air brushing against my arms like a physical warning. The room reeked of a sickening blend of formaldehyde and the expensive, shimmering perfume Mrs. Harrington always wore. A scent that now felt like a predatory marking. Around me, the crystal chandeliers cast a golden light that was no longer warm, but calculating and measuring, illuminating the skeletal frames and the translucent pieces of preserved skin pinned to them with sharp silver needles. My breath came in shallow, panicked hitches. My eyes were locked on the vanity mirror, but I wasn't looking at my own reflection. I was looking at the ledger resting on the marble counter. Its navy blue cover looked expensive and sharp, the kind of professional record you'd expect at a Harrington Global investor gala. But the contents were a gruesome deviation from any corporate strategy. With trembling hands, I reached out to touch the paper. I flipped back through the pages I had seen moments before Mrs. Harrington appeared in the doorway. Each page was a name tag for a different tragedy. I saw the names of women who had gone missing in the state over the last decade. Women with high positions, elegant postures, and shimmering gowns. Beside their photos were the swatches, small preserved sections of skin that Mrs. Harrington had harvested like fabric samples. I found the page for Vanessa Cole. There she was, the marketing director, captured in a candid moment at a company dinner. Mrs. Harrington had meticulously measured her neck and collarbone, her elegant calligraphy noting the fine texture and resilient elasticity of Vanessa's skin. A small chill ran through my chest as I realized that the woman I had seen laughing with Daniel, her hand resting confidently on his arm, had already been measured for replacement. I turned the page again, my pulse quickening until it pounded in my ears like a slow, elegant jazz melody. I reached the entry for Daniel's second wife, a woman he had mentioned only briefly, claiming the divorce had been mutual and quiet. But the ledger told a different story. Her photo showed a woman with long dark hair and a confident smile, very much like Vanessa. Beside her was a large swatch of skin from her cheek and jawline. Underneath, Mrs. Harrington had written, "Donor Sarah. Perfect for the lower face. Lasted 12 years. Integrity beginning to crack." The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls of glass and polished stone closing in on me. I wasn't the first wife to be hidden near the bar. I wasn't the first woman Daniel had asked to disappear into the background to avoid being out of place. I realized with a heavy, sinking feeling that Daniel wasn't just a rising executive at Harrington Global. He was the scout. He was the one who brought the porcelain texture and the perfect collarbones into the house under the guise of marriage. I looked back at my own photo, the latest entry. I was staring at the city skyline from the balcony, a dark blue silhouette against the evening sky, completely unaware that I was being measuring for the final piece of a horrific mosaic. Porcelain texture. Perfect for the neck and collarbone. The note repeated in my mind. A movement in the vanity mirror caught my eye. Mrs. Harrington was still standing in the doorway. The iron bolt slid shut behind her, her posture carrying a youthful grace that made her ancient wrinkles look like a poorly fitted mask. On one side of her face, the skin was smooth and radiant, a perfect match for the girl I had recognized from a missing persons report on the news. She was smoothing the fine silk thread through her curved surgical needle, her movements sharp and flawless. "You have such a sharp mind, Emily," she murmured, her voice a chillingly beautiful melody. "Daniel always said you were brilliant. It's why he was so worried you'd notice the irregularities. He just didn't want things to get awkward before the transition." Transition. The word hung in the air like the heavy chandeliers above us. "He told me I was out of place," I whispered, my voice sounding brittle and small. "He told everyone I couldn't make it tonight." Mrs. Harrington smiled. I backed away from the vanity until my heels hit the cold stone of the attic floor. The room suddenly feeling like a trap designed specifically for me. Mrs. Harrington stood between me and the only exit, her silhouette sharp and flawless against the pale evening sky visible through the narrow attic windows. The iron bolt, which I had slid back with such desperate curiosity, had been slammed shut once more, its metallic ring final and absolute. "Nom, Daniel, always brings me such lovely daughters-in-law," she whispered, her voice a youthful, chilling melody that echoed the jazz-like rhythm of my own pounding heart. In the dim, sickly light of the chandeliers, her face was a horrific patchwork of past and present. On one side, the deep, ancient wrinkles of a 70-year-old matriarch. On the other, the fresh, glowing cheek of a girl whose porcelain texture matched the swatches in her ledger. She held the curved surgical needle with a grace that was as professional as it was terrifying. It was the movement of someone who had perfected a role over many years, someone who didn't just attend networking events but orchestrated the very fabric of the people within them. "Daniel told you to stay near the bar tonight," she said, her eyes moving quickly as she calculated her next move. "He smoothed your sleeves and clipped your name tag just to keep you unaware, to prevent things from getting awkward before the fitting. He was worried you'd feel out of place, Emily. But the truth is, you belong in this room more than anyone else. You are the final piece of my Harrington Global legacy." I looked down at the small silver bracelet on my wrist, the one that represented a life that was simple and real, now feeling like a dark blue knee-length shroud. Every word Daniel had ever said to me, every time he had hidden me from senior executives, every time he had read the words on his lips that I couldn't make it, was a measurement of my utility to this gruesome workshop. I wasn't his wife, I was a donor. I was being measured for my collarbone and neck, destined to be the woman people were supposed to see next to Daniel at the next annual gala. "But your skin, Emily," she continued, taking a slow step forward, her shimmering tunic catching the golden light like a warning sign. "It is the finest I have seen in a century. Such a beautiful dark blue knee-length porcelain texture. Don't worry. You will not disappear. You will live on, draped across my skeletal frames, pinned together with silver needles for the next 30 years. The rhythmic thud-drag, thud-drag of the floorboards above my head for the past few weeks suddenly made sense. It was the sound of the previous 3 wives being moved, being measured, being prepared for the dripping black bags that vanished into the dense woods behind the garden. The dark, viscous fluid I had seen on the marble floors wasn't an accident. It was the price of a legacy that Daniel was so desperate to join. I lunged for the bar of the iron bolt, but she was faster, her movements sharp and focused, fueled by a grace that number 70-year-old should possess. She gripped my arm with fingers that felt like cold stone, measuring my resistance with calculated precision. Daniel told me I was out of place. I gasped, the cold evening air of the attic suite suffocating me. And he was right, dear, she whispered, leaning closer until I could smell the expensive perfume mixed with the copper rot of her tonics. You were just a guest. But tonight, the transition begins. You will become the image of Harrington Global. You will belong in the Halbrook Grand Hotel ballroom more than half the people inside it, because I will be wearing you. As she raised the curved needle, its sharp steel glowing against the dark evening sky, I realized why Daniel had never mentioned his previous wives. They were still here, in a way. They were the map of deep wrinkles and smooth cheeks that stood before me. They were the networking and calculating secrets gathered in the airless silence of the mansion. The chandeliers above began to blur into crystal constellations as the first stitch was measured against my neck. In that moment, I understood the true message whispered by the Harrington mansion. It wasn't where powerful people gather. It was where they were made, piece by piece, swatch by swatch. The iron bolt remained slid shut from the inside. As the youthful, chilling melody of her voice filled the room, I knew that my invisible life as a freelance programmer had finally ended, and my visible, horrific life as a Harrington legacy had begun. The version of Daniel standing under the crystal chandeliers of the ballroom would indeed have a wife who could make it to the next event. She just wouldn't be me.